If you're going to teach through the whole book, I would say that there is great benefit and power in being forced to teach a chapter. You say, I actually don't know what this is doing here. Welcome to Teach Through the Word, the podcast for Bible teachers. Kris Langan with you again. Back with me as always, my friend Peyton. You ready to do this, Peyton?
I think I am.
You better be ready. Jonathan's ready. Jonathan, how you doing in the booth?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
All right, I want to get to this one. Genesis has so much to cover, guys, that I really want to skip through the intro and get right to it. Today, we dive back into the book of Genesis, day 2 in our series, and today we are looking at the context. Time for us to get analytical on how to teach through an epic story like Genesis. We are here to equip you, Bible teachers, to do what you do better, and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. Get equipped, get trained, and while you're at it, get a behind-the-scenes look here at Through the Word. All right, Peyton, I'm going to hand it over to you again to ask the questions as we look at context. What do you want to know?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't say get equipped, get trained, and get a manicure while you're at it. So that was good that you didn't go that way, because you could have, in my mind, definitely went to some different places than you did when I heard that. But
I feel like the timing works. Just put your AirPods in. We probably have listeners right now manicuring it up while they get equipped and get trained.
That's kind of a cool thought. What are some other things you think people might be doing right now? Listening,
walking the dog,
mowing the lawn, painting a house.
Yeah, that could be house painting. Yeah.
It's plotting to take over the world.
I'm guessing we got some bivocational pastors, and they are busy trying to squeeze in some chores, somehow, while also getting some equipping because they don't have time to go off to school. So we're going to provide it right here, and we're going to get to it because they only got so much time walking that dog.
We do, man. And I sat on an assembly line listening to teaching tape after teaching tape when I was a missionary. So welcome if that's where you're at. But Kris, we want to get into Genesis today. And we want to really go into Genesis and ask you, what's the uniqueness about teaching? Like, what's unique about teaching through Genesis as opposed to other books?
Well, Genesis has a lot of uniqueness, the humanness of the characters, the power of an epic story that follows for so long, and the variety of teaching. You get the creation story, the flood story, and then the dispersion of nations. You get genealogies to teach through right next to the introduction of these incredible characters that you follow for generations. You get generations of story and get to follow this family line and see how faith is passed on from one to the next between very different personalities. Genesis, it's a narrative, and there's lots of narratives in the Bible, but Genesis, like no other, is truly epic in its presentation. There are a series of epics, of course. Exodus is an epic. You get grand stories in the Bible, and when you teach one of the epics, it must carry that epic feel. So for me, when I'm studying, when I'm writing, I want to have epic movie soundtracks on. I want to be listening to Lord of the Rings, to Braveheart, to Far and Away, to Star Wars. And I want to be watching those movies when I'm relaxing at, because that puts my mind in that mode that I'm presenting this grand story. And there is a great art form to that. Those movies are rare because it's difficult to do. And really, in the antiquity, in antiquity of literature and ancient literature, Genesis is one of the all-time greats. Whether you're a believer or not, it is just an incredible series of stories. So that is really, you've got to approach Genesis from that, because you got to bring that out. And there are a lot of mistaken ways. If you just try to teach the science angle, we'll talk about that tomorrow. But that's great to include that. But you're missing what the story is, what the book of Genesis is. If you focus too much on trying to just point to Jesus, that's a lot of that in there. That's powerful. Or if you do too much on just picking apart, analytically, what is a covenant, present it. You've got to do all that, but your first responsibility, present this grand story for what it is.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's also a sense in which Genesis starts off real broad, like here's the whole world. Then here's all the nations and peoples of the world. And then all of a sudden it kind of narrows down, but it's still epic because it's telling the roots of everything. Even at one point, you even said, hey, these are my ancestors. I came from this,
Mm,
which, depending on where you're at in the story, if you have Jewish heritage, you can trace it back to, hey, Abraham, or
yeah.
you go before that, chapter 11. I can trace these are all of our ancestors. But teaching in this genre, you want to story tell or tell a story for a grand epic, and that's a skill set. How do you do that, Kris? Because you do it well, but how can our listeners do it well?
Well, I think it's a developed skill, and I was being serious when I was talking about watching some epics or read. If you're a reader, read an epic because you start analyzing how do they do that so well? How do they develop characters over this broad sense? And it has to do with the soundtrack. It has to do with the setting, and some of those things you want to do well. So for introducing now Genesis is a series of epics. So you get Abraham's story is an epic. The flood is a shorter epic. Um, Jacob is a really powerful epic that carries him from place to place. And as you look at the layout of the story, you'll find locations go with periods of their life, and you want to carry that. What you don't want to do is turn into an English teacher about it. I love English teachers. They teach us how to do this, but what they're doing is not storytelling. Your English teacher doesn't usually tell you the story. They tell you how to pick apart the story. You don't want to do that for your audience. You don't want to dissect it. You want to tell it. So, keys to telling a good story, and especially a grand story, you've got to lay the scene. And to do that, I always put myself there. I want to see the desert. I want to see the homes. I want to see the green of the promised land. I want to see Abraham and his growing fortune as it expands further and further out. And there's not enough room for him and Lot, and there's shepherds that are fighting each other. I want to see how expansive that is. So, as an example, Genesis 37 begins Joseph's story. So, when I enter into Joseph's story, there's two things I want to do. I want to look in and see where he is, look around. Joseph is still with his family. He's got a big family, but they're all nomads. They're living in tents. So, I want to see that there. I also want to see who he is. I want to lay the scene, number one, and I want to humanize the characters, number two. Only an epic story really gives the opportunity to get to know a character over the expanse of their life. And so Joseph's story, Jacob's story, Abraham's story, you meet them at one place in their life, but you go with them on a long journey over time. So when I meet Joseph, I want to introduce him in a connective way. That's why I say at the beginning of his story, do you remember what it's like to be 17? And I introduce that, and then I develop who he is, connect with him. He's a little brother. He's always getting pushed around with his big brothers, but he's a favorite. And so I want to connect all those pieces together to relate to the humanness of his character.
Now, for those that fell asleep in English class and they don't remember what an epic is, maybe remind us of what an epic is and what the benefit of teaching an epic is for a Bible teacher.
So an epic is a story, but it's a great, big, grand story that carries a huge arc with multiple themes weaving through. Usually, an epic has multiple location and spans a great deal of time. And so, a mini story, a small story, just meets somebody in a moment, in a situation, in a short series of events, trying to solve some problem. But an epic really follows somebody's life, and you get to see over their lifetime. And there's some movies usually carry epics better than TV shows, but TV shows, if they're done well, can carry. Actually, sorry, a movie is really a short version of an epic. Some TV series really take on grand stories and weave them together. Like a story like This Is Us takes a family line and introduces you to several generations and keeps weaving those stories together. The benefit of teaching an epic is the depth of lessons that you can teach. The danger, if you think about it in contrast, the danger of not teaching the fullness of a story is really losing the weight of the message, and just you end up delivering easy Bible answers. You take an example. If you just look at Genesis, I don't think I have time to teach 50 chapters. These stories are too big. I'd be lost in this for way too long. I'm just going to get I'm going to get the heart of the story. So Joseph's story, what's the heart of that? At the end of the story, Joseph says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. All right, skip to the end. I'll just deliver that. That captures the whole story. Well, you can do that and you can say that, and your audience will say, okay, that's a great thing to remember. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. But you got to remember that the people in your audience are dealing with some serious hurts in their life that have built up for many years. And your little memory verse, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, they're going to say, okay, we'll see how that works out. But if you give them opportunity to connect with Joseph's experience, that at 17 years old, he was sold into slavery, that he lived in a prison, that he lived in slavery for years, then false accusations came against him. Then he went to jail for several years. And all through that, the Lord was with him. But this is not what he expected God with us to look like in life. It was, and he had dreams. He had these great big dreams. And as you expand that 20 years of story, you relate to Joseph. And if you go to that before that the whole scene where he forgives his brothers, just back up a little bit when he has that face off with his brothers. Such a powerful story when Judah offers to trade places with Benjamin, and Joseph can't take it anymore. He sends all the officials out. He ducks away quietly into a room where he can weep, but he's weeping so loud the entire palace hears him. He is yelling out loud. He has gone through trauma for years, and he's finally letting it all out. That's a powerful story. You don't get that if you skip to the end. The epic allows you to really get to know, connect your audience with Joseph, with Jacob, with Abraham, all different stories, and even with Judah, with some of the bad guys in the story, and allow you to connect with their stories and relate in a deep and powerful way. That's what the epic is for.
So there was a lot of places in Genesis where you would say, "Hey, there is no bad guy, no good
There's no
guys,
good
bad
guys, no
guys in
bad
this."
guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's just being very human. But when you come
Yeah.
to Joseph, it's a little bit different. And we see a connection there between Joseph and Jesus. How in a book on an epic scale of Genesis did you connect the story with
Mm.
Jesus?
So the whole Bible should be pointing to Jesus, right? We know it, we would all love to get on the Emmaus road with Jesus and find out how every single story points to him. And it's part of the responsibility of a Bible teacher to make the connections to Jesus. And some of those you listen are a bit of a stretch, but some of them are really powerful. We know they're there. Jesus says that they are there. But the methodology of delivering them, there needs to be some subtlety to that. I don't think that it's effective to just say, "Ooh, look, there's Jesus, there's Jesus, there's Jesus. Look, they're in the cup, they're in there's the bread and wine with the cupbearer and the baker." And yeah, those things, that's just like, oh, cool, there's Jesus. So as I deliver it, I want to think through what was God's purpose in putting all of that into the Bible text and into these stories, because that took a lot of work for God to do. And what is his methodology in delivering it? Because God makes those clear, but not too overt. In the same way that when Jesus told the parables, there was a purpose in some people are going to get this and some aren't. That subtlety has a power to it. So I want to deliver those things. I want to deliver those over time. To me, the great power in those connections is that it humanizes Jesus' story for me, really connecting with Jesus as the Son of Man, as the suffering servant. And what Joseph's story does for me is I connect with him in a very human way and what he's gone through, enduring false accusations, living for years in prison, suffering in ways that he didn't deserve, and yet living righteous. I connect with his story. My heart goes out to him. Once that connection is fully made, then I want to deliver Jesus. After I've really connected my heart to Joseph's heart, then I'll bring Jesus into it. Now that you've connected with who Joseph is and his experience, now let's take a look at Jesus, because I think that's God's purpose in it, of delivering the whole epic. And then at the end of that, making this connection to my Savior and what he went through in a very human way.
The genealogies. Okay, so there's a ton of them in Genesis. How do you teach those? And Kris, to ask the question everybody's thinking, why do you even bother teaching those?
All right, this actually provides this great contrast. You'll see it. There's 3 chapters in a row that provide this incredible contrast: 36, 37, and 38, changing gears so drastically chapter by chapter. 36 is the genealogy of Esau, not even a Messiah genealogy. It's Esau. It's kind of tracking off to the side. 37 then is this introduction of Joseph, the grand story of Joseph. And then 38 veers off into Judah and Tamar. So you've really got to switch gears up, and it is tempting and sometimes maybe right to skip some of the chapters if it's not what God has you teaching. But if you're going to teach through the whole book, I would say that there is great benefit and power in being forced to teach a chapter. You say, I actually don't know what this is doing here. So in teaching in genealogy, first of all, I want to recognize and be honest, it's boring. And but I also decided to use that opportunity to examine together with the reader, well, why is it here? So the first thing I do is I set myself in the reader's perspective and my listener's perspective, and recognize what is the first thing on their mind, like, why am I reading this in the first place? They're mostly thinking, I know it's important because it's Bible. So I recognize that it is important because it's Bible. So let's think it through together. So a couple of things that I do with it. One, I remind them that Genesis is not a mythology. It's certainly not written as a mythology. There are Bible teachers who would say it's a mythology. I disagree. This is actually one of the reasons I disagree. If it's a mythology, why do I bother with the family line of Esau that doesn't seem to go anywhere? This part is very clearly historical record. It was record keeping. And a lot of parts of the Bible are not just history as in grand stories, but history as in, well, here's just a record of what happened, or here's a record of the family line, or who the priests were, or the collection that was made. Lots of parts of the Bible are that. They weren't intended to be bedtime stories. Don't tell them to your kids as bedtime stories, but recognize them as important for what they are. Historical records are important. So I want to recognize that first, make the connection, and then step back and say, all right, so what's important about this? Why is it important as a historical record? And figure that out. And I can say for myself, I've really gotten great benefit of forcing myself to do the research, go to the commentaries, listen to other teachers, and figure out what's this doing here and set it within its context. And I actually kind of surprisingly enjoyed the genealogy of Esau.
It's good. What about the hard stories? You mentioned Judah and Tamar.
Right.
What do you do with something like that?
So yeah, go right 2 chapters later, Genesis 38, you have Judah and Tamar. The Bible has a lot of hard stories and dealing with hard issues. Many of them are here in Genesis. In this story, so Judah hires a prostitute who turns out to be the widow of his dead son. In fact, she's the widow of 2 of his dead sons and was supposed to marry the third. There's a lot of complex issues. A lot of them include a lot of them having to do with sex, and worse than that, sex that is the wrong way. He's hiring a prostitute. So first off, warn the parents and know who's in the audience. But second, also deal with it as it is. It's difficult, and the story doesn't pretend not to be difficult. The real reason that teaching a story like this is difficult isn't the story. It's the misconception that the Bible is a book of happy stories with easy answers. The Bible is not that. Judah himself is a very complex character. He's not all good guy or bad guy. He's I call him the practical, the pragmatist. You know, he's a realist. He believes in God, but he's also pragmatic about life. So he's actually a very relatable character for a lot of your listeners. And the story is really a lot of it's about Tamar, who is used by wicked and selfish men for sex. And then she's sent on her way, just go back to your family because she didn't fulfill her cultural obligation of getting pregnant. That's a horrible reality for her. And the truth is that a lot of people today, we have a different culture today, but a lot of women can relate to that. And I've heard women complain, why don't we hear stories about rape from the pulpit? It's a hard thing to cover from the pulpit a lot of time, or rape, or in this case, adultery, or you got to be careful of your audience. But a lot of your audience is saying, why doesn't the Bible deal with the very harsh realities that I deal with? You know, reality check for you in your audience. If you have an average collection of people in your audience, as much of a third of the women in your audience have been abused sexually at some point in their life. They carry that trauma into church. And if you don't at some point recognize it and deal with it and acknowledge that the Bible does deal with it, and does provide hope and answers and compassion for it. If you don't do that because you want to skip the hard subjects, then you have a lot of people in your audience who come in week in, week out, like, yeah, that was hopeful, that was great, but it still hasn't covered my serious problems. So deal with the hard problems and don't treat the answers like they're easy, because none of the answers there are easy.
It's good. And speaking of the hard things to deal with, our podcast is out of time. So this is the hardest part, Kris, is saying goodbye to you and to our audience.
All right, we're going to do it. That'll do it for today, guys. That is day 3 here in Genesis, or that was day 2. That was day 2. Man, too much good stuff. Thanks for joining us for Teach Through the Word, the podcast for Bible teachers. Tomorrow, we are going to jump into the science question in Genesis. How do you handle that, especially if you, as the teacher, are not the scientist? Each week here at Teach Through the Word, we bring you one Bible book or one basic training essential, or one guest teacher interview as we equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better, and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. We'll see you back here next time.